It's time for the Psychic from Saffron City, and we are beginning this deck list with Abra from Expedition. Only 40 HP, but you do have the potential to do a couple of things here with only one Psychic Energy. You can either deal a little bit of chip damage, or begin disrupting your opponent by potentially confusing. Because you have to flip a coin, the Confuse Ray route is more in case there's immediate threat across the table, like if your opponent has played a big basic, and you just go, well, I don't want them attacking me next turn. Because if you're just confusing a basic Pokemon, odds are it's just going to evolve next turn and the special condition is going to go away anyway. Following that up's going to be 4 copies of the Energy Recall Kadabra, also from Expedition, just to load up that Kadabra, get it ready to evolve and attack next turn. 1 copy of the base set Alakazam that was reprinted in Legendary Collection. This one's mainly going to sit on your bench and help deprive your opponent of knockouts by moving damage counters around. To help it out, there's also 1 copy of Expedition Alakazam. This is the Synchro Blast one, where you can deal 80 damage for 3 energy as long as the number of energy attached to Alakazam matches the number of energy attached to the defending Pokemon. The Psy-Mimic Poke Power can be very useful, but it's also very situational, but that's kind of what the point of this deck is judging the situation and responding accordingly with all of these different tools, because we are running a 3rd single type of Alakazam. This is the Energy Jump one that can help out that Synchro Blast Alakazam by moving energy around. Also, Psychic is just a decent attack to unload with whenever your opponent's Pokemon just has tons of energy. This deck list is going to be dealing out a lot of punishment for decks that just go heavy on energy. Just across these 3 Alakazam, you're going to be able to fire off big attacks, you're going to be moving energy around, you're going to be moving damage counters around. It's a very nice little Psychic toolbox just with those 3 Alakazam. But after that, you see the 2 EVs dropping, you know what's coming next. 2 copies of Espeon. One of them is the Discovery version, the non-holo version, and this is going to be another card that can potentially confuse your opponent using Psybeam, dealing a decent chunk of damage with 30. And the other copy is going to be the holo Discovery version that is a better card, but I felt like just loading up on both Espeons, for one, didn't give the other one time to shine, but also made the deck a little overpowered because you were just blasting in with psychic attacks one after the other, depending on what Pokemon you had out. It was either Alakazam, Hypno, or Espeon. Speaking of Hypno, we're also going to be running a couple of copies of that Rocket's Drowsy with the super useful long distance hypnosis effect. Now, when you're using this, you can accidentally put your active to sleep, so you want to use this right before you're using some type of swapping mechanic or right before you're about to evolve your active Pokemon. That way, in case you do inflict sleep on your own active, you can just get out of it immediately. This Hypno, I feel like, is a very underrated card. The Sleep Pendulum power allows you to just automatically put your opponent's active to sleep, as long as Hypno is your active Pokemon. And then Hypno's Spiral Aura attack. It's going to be dealing 30 damage for 3 energy, which is not great, but then it does give you the option to potentially gust out one of your opponent's bench Pokemon after the attack has dealt damage to the active, which can be very useful, especially if you have another Hypno or a Drowsy on the bench, where as soon as, they try to load up whatever the new active is, you can put it to sleep and try to stall them out that way while you get a bigger attack from an Espeon or an Alakazam set up. Your search and draw is going to be coming from the usual places. There's a full playset of Pokemon Fan Club, so that you can search out more Abras, get an Eevee on the bench, get a Drowsy on the bench, and depending on what situation you're looking at across the table, that's really going to be all you need early on. Professor Elm and Copycat are also going to help you draw into more of the resources that you need, particularly the evolved forms of all of these Pokemon. Bill's Teleporter is also going to be a great source of draw power 50% of the time. You're going to be utilizing that Legendary Collection Alakazam to move damage counters around, as I mentioned earlier, just kind of spreading them around on your Pokemon so that they're always just out of reach of your opponent getting a KO, which is very frustrating for your opponent, especially if you start laying down all of these potions. In addition to all the other strategies we've been talking about, there is a lot of stall in this deck, and that's part of it, is just spreading the damage around, keeping your active alive for as long as possible, because you're also going to be looking at using Goldberry in this deck in between turns, healing off damage on your active Pokemon, so you can always move just enough damage counters onto your benched Pokemon so that in between turns when Goldberry activates, it's just going to heal off that damage. Likewise, you can also move damage counters off of your benched Pokemon onto an active Pokemon that doesn't have any damage counters on it, attach that gold berry, and you're getting rid of them in the same way. You're really just removing as many damage counters from your side of the field as possible with the combination of these cards. Been talking a lot about just adjusting to whatever scenario you see on your board state. Double Gust is going to be a part of that, of just going, hey, you know, you have a Pokemon on your bench that has the same amount of energy as this Alakazam that's ready to go on my bench. If you can force your opponent into that scenario, that's ideal. Not always going to happen that way. Your opponent's not going to play directly into your hands all the time, but sometimes you can force them to do that, or at least force them to make a decision of, yeah, I could play right into their hands, or do this less bad move that's also just really going to put me at a disadvantage anyway. It's still a disadvantage. But there's also a couple of copies of Switch in here just in case you do need to get out of a situation where you accidentally put your own active Pokemon to sleep and you didn't have a way to get out of it, but you really needed to put your opponent's active to sleep, or just inserting a benched Alakazam into the active position when it's ready to attack. That way, if your opponent's active is the main threat, the Pokemon that you are wanting to take out with that Synchro Blast, you're able to just slot it up into the active position easily with Switch and take care of business. There will also be a lot of variance just with your starting Pokemon. If you're starting with Eevee, you're going to be attacking very quickly. If you're starting with Drowsy, it's going to be very disruptive early on. You just have to adapt. And by that, I just mean that there's a lot of different routes you can take strategy-wise with this deck in responding to what your opponent does. A lot of it is going to depend on what you end up starting the game with, what resources you have available, but as the game progresses, you will be able to search out those resources and build up your win con that's going to be established through moving damage counters, stalling your opponent, and then landing those massive Synchro Blast or Psychic attacks at the right moment to get those key knockouts. Of course, if you do have a preferred Espeon or Alakazam strategy, you can proportion that within your own deck list any way you like. Since we've covered those options pretty well, we'll go ahead and look at the available Mr. Mimes we have. It's just the Aquapolis one. That's the only Mr. Mime in Neo on. This is an easy card to overlook too, but can be very annoying early on just because of that energy barrier body that is limiting the amount of damage it's going to be taking, because early on, your opponent's active Pokemon are only going to be dealing 10 or 20 damage, so if you can attach one energy on there, you've prevented 10, get both energy on there to attack with Mind Shock, and now you're preventing 20 damage per incoming attack, which is going to be really annoying. It makes Mr. Mime's 50 HP go a lot further. This Pokemon would have been in the deck, but I really wanted to use that Hypno. That's the only reason it isn't. The Hypno slot is coming from Sabrina's Stadium 2 team. We also have Exeggutor and Jinx. The reprinted Hypno from Legendary Collection doesn't have a whole lot going for it other than just being a damage sponge. Having 90 HP on a stage 1 is pretty nice, but its ability to attack or do much of anything else is pretty limited. We've already covered the Psychic Exeggutors and other theme decks. Yeah, they're good cards, but they don't really fit into this deck with the Alakazam and the Espeon. Same thing for the Jinxes in Neo on. Meditate is a great cleanup attack for late in the game, but we kind of already have Espeon for that. Like, Psychic is going to accomplish the same thing that Meditate does most of the time. Unless you're just getting walled by a deck that it has bulky Pokemon and very low energy costs. It seems fitting that the Sabrina theme deck, even for Neo on, ended up being a Psychic Toolbox deck just because traditionally that's what Sabrina cards do best. As always, let me know your thoughts about this particular build down in the comments. Let me know what you would change, how you would play differently. Let me know what you think about Sabrina as a trainer. Whatever type of discussion you want to have in the comments, I'd be happy to join in. Thanks again for watching the channel. Stay tuned for more theme decks in the coming weeks. Social media links are in the video description. I'll see you next video.